we've started a new series, the Ezra series. So Ryan has decided to, start preaching out of Ezra. And the last two Sundays, he preached on Ezra 1, chapters 1, and Ezra chapters 2. And this covered how the Israelites were released from captivity. They were in captivity for over 70 years. And then it covers how the Jews returned home, back to their homelands, about a 900-mile journey, taking about 4 months. And basically, the past two lessons that in chapters 1 and 2 kind of covered how they were released, what did they bring with them, and who all came, who all went back home. So just as a recap, how was it done? God moved King of Persia's, King Cyrus's heart, King of Persia's heart, to release the Jews. And remember, this was no small feat. That's not normal for a king that already owns these people. They have them captive. They own their skills, their labor, their resources, their wealth. They own a whole nation of people. To all of a sudden say, no, I'm just going to let all that go. Go ahead and go. That's something that's not normal. That's definitely no small miracle. That was God all over that moved his heart. Then Ryan preached about what did they bring with them. So basically, the king released all of the silver and gold and artifacts that were plundered from the Holy Temple when they were taken captive. And on top of all of this, there was also free will offerings, adding an immense amount of gold, silver, goods, and livestock, all this to the departing Jews to take with them. And then as far as the who, last week we covered chapter 2, which is listing all the people who went. It basically listed all the men by families, numbering over 42,000. And in reality, that total number, if you consider them women and children, there's over 100,000 that came back home. So now we're going to start chapter 3. And in chapter 3, we're going to discuss what did they do once they got there? Well, when they got home, what did they do? So let's read chapter 3, verse 1, just starting in verse 1 here. When the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, the people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. So these people just got released from captivity, traveled a long way. They got back to their homeland, and they all went back to their individual towns where they came from in their homeland. But try to visualize, try to think about the mess they were facing when they got home. They've been away for over 70 years. Home wasn't the same when they left it. Things were destroyed. Their lands were untilled. Their cities were in ruins. There's no walls, no protection, no fortifications, no order at all, no system of government, no order. And keep in mind too, they were surrounded by nations and peoples that were not happy that they returned back to their land, that it was given back to them. So think about this. When I was reading this and preparing the lesson, I was thinking about what would be the natural thing to do if that was us in that position. What would we naturally want to do when we arrived back home? I would think first and foremost, protection. That's just how it was back then. In that society, in that culture, you had to have protection. You either were protected or you got overrun. You were one of the two. Protection, fortification, armies. But beyond that, just tilling the land, or whatever businesses or livelihood you had to have, the means you have to live, getting all that in order. And so those would be like the top of my list, I would imagine, for most people. So we're going to read in the next two verses, verses 2 and 3. Let's see what the Israelites do. What did they do when they got home? So then Joshua, son of Jozadak, and his fellow priest, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his associates began to build the altar of the God of Israel, to sacrifice burnt offerings on it, in accordance with what it is written in the law of Moses, of the man of God. Despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both the morning and evening sacrifices. So here, what we just read, they did not do any of those things that we naturally would do. Their very first priority was just to build an altar to God and properly worship him exactly as it was written. If you think about this, at first I'm thinking, well, that goes against what would be natural, but really to them, this was natural. Think about it. These were people, they were captive for over 70 years, not allowed to live and worship their God as they knew, and the way they knew he should be worshiped. All they could think about was to get home, worship their God who set them free. That's all they can think about. It's kind of like if you think of a romantic love story, two soulmates separated for a long, long time. When they finally meet and get to see each other, what's the very first thing they're going to do? They're going to embrace. So this explains their spiritual hunger for God and what they just did. But even still, imagine the hard choices they had to make to put God first when they got home. Because like I said before, the nation of Israel, it was surrounded by enemies, people that didn't like him. Israel was known for having a powerful God that can do great things. Their surrounding peoples, around them, they weren't happy that the Jews were given back their land and started worshiping their God again. Some of these people lived in that land and were kind of pushed out by the king of Persia because they gave back to the Jews. So there just was not a lot of friendliness going on there amongst their neighbors. But despite their fear and despite their desperation, the very first thing they did was go to God, build an altar. Now think about this. How did they know to do this? Where did they learn this from? They learned it from Abraham, the father of their faith. In Genesis, God sent Abraham all over to foreign lands, promising lands that all these different lands would belong to him and his descendants. Well, during those times, those were scary times for Abraham. Those weren't just like road trips. Oh, I get to go on another trip. God didn't tell him where he was going, what he was going to face. And Abraham was already very comfortable. God says, nope, go. And Abraham went. And each time God told him to go, he went. So these were desperate times for Abraham. But whenever Abraham arrived at a new place, the very first thing he did was to build an altar to God. Abraham built altars, not houses. These moments that Abraham had with God really centered around these altars. These were deeply connecting moments between God and Abraham when he built these altars and worshiped God. That's really where they connected. The Israelites were in a similar situation. They needed that connection with God and did the exact same thing despite their fear. So, in our lives, I think back on my life, in all of our lives, we have just different times of desperation, different journeys that we go on. Some of these journeys are great, joyous times. Some of these journeys have crushing, debilitating sorrow. But we have these journeys in our life. These, great struggles and these great times of desperation. If you think back, those are defining moments in your life. That's when you get back up and persevere and push forward. These journeys forge us into what we're meant to be. The most terrible struggles and terrible times can have the greatest and most beautiful outcomes if it moves us to embrace God tighter and build that deeper relationship. So a challenge, a devastating time in your life can be the most precious memory, or it could be just a failure you're trying to forget. And really all that depends on the choices we make. Will you build your altar to God, or will you be buried in fear and sorrow? We're always in one of two places. You're either one, in the midst of a journey, you're going through something now, or two, you're getting ready to go on one. That's the way life is. And here's the thing, whether you want to go on that journey or not, bon voyage. Have safe travels. It's happening. That ticket is coming and it is not refundable. That's life. But in our present time, we're no longer required to go out and build altars. That's not part of the new law. But we are required to go out and build deep, momentous connections with God. That is a requirement. So when God sees us, he's not going to say, "I never knew you." It's going to be hard to say, "I never knew you," if you have life-changing times over and over again where you're just so deep and connected with God. So these journeys, as hard as they can be, they're cherished times. And I just want you to never forget those altars in your life. Never forget them, because those are precious moments between you and God. They're meant to not only be remembered, but they're meant to be shared with others and shared to bring glory to God. So if you're in the middle of a journey now, I just want to encourage you to be kind to your future self by doing your best to build that connection with God, to stay the course, to do what really needs to be done, even when you don't even feel like getting back up again, even if you don't know which way is up. Because when you do, it doesn't seem like it now, but when you look back on those times, you too will be able to look back at that altar, and that'll be a cherished memory for you. So every single day that we get up, we make a choice. We choose a direction. So a question to ask yourself is, what choice are you going to make? Okay, so now let's get back into Ezra 3. We're going to read verses 4 through 6. We're going to read how they celebrated and worshiped God. So then, in accordance with what is written, they celebrated the festival of tabernacles with the required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day. After that, they presented the regular burnt offerings, the new moon sacrifices, and the sacrifices for all the appointed sacred festivals of the Lord, as well as those brought as freewill offerings to the Lord. On the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, though the foundation of the temple, the Lord's temple, had not yet been laid. So again, I like how that started out in accordance with what was written. They did this, this, and this. They were just so eager to follow everything down to the smallest detail. They wanted to make sure they were just so desperate to cling on to God. They wanted to do it right. So next we're going to read about the preparations they made to build the temple in verses 7 through 11. Then they gave money to the masons and carpenters, and gave food and drink and olive oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre, so that they would bring cedar logs by sea from Lebanon to Joppa, as authorized by Cyrus, king of Persia. In the 2nd month of the 2nd year, after their arrival at the house of God in Jerusalem, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Josedek, and the rest of the people The priests and Levites and all who have returned from the captivity to Jerusalem began the work. They appointed Levites 20 years old and older to supervise the building of the house of the Lord. Joshua and his sons and brothers, and Kadmiel and his sons, descendants of Hodaviah, and the sons of Henadad, and their sons and brothers, all Levites, joined together in supervising those working on the house of God. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments and with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, took their place to praise the Lord as prescribed by David, king of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord, "He is good. His love towards Israel endures forever." And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. So here it talks about they gathered the skilled workers, they gathered the materials, had it all brought in. They planned this out to a T. They appointed project leaders at all levels to oversee all the work, and they began to begin building the temple, and then they laid the foundation. And again, I like how it says in like the second half of verse 10, as prescribed by King David. You know, they didn't just wing it. They were following scripture on how to build the temple, on how to even worship God. They were just following this to a T. Their hearts were all in. That was where they were at. They were just released from captivity. You know, their hearts were all in. So now we're going to read the last two verses in Ezra chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. And this gets a little confusing, at least it was for me. So I'm going to explain what I discovered here. So I'm starting verse 12. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sounds of the shouts of joy from the sounds of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. So when I read that, my first thought was, what's happening here? You know, there were many people weeping when the foundation was laid, but at the very same time, there were others shouting for joy. And both sides were so loud that you couldn't tell if this was a happy or a sad occasion. From far off, it was just a lot of shouting. That's really all you could tell. So I had to think about, I had to research just a little bit and think about this. What's going on here? What's happening? So what I've found was the older Jews among them, as they're watching the foundation being laid, and as they laid it, they are mourning because they are in mourning because they remember the former temple. They remember Solomon's temple that was destroyed. And they can clearly see this new temple is not going to be anything close to the splendor of the former temple. They can clearly see this. And if you recall, the former temple was built by King Solomon. This man was the richest king in all of history. He was the wisest man ever, had everything at his disposal. This guy was so wise that not only did he have his nation and kingdom run to a T, his wisdom was known from far and wide that other nations, their leaders came to him to seek advice. Help me run my nation. You have it to a T when you got it down like that. That's the wisdom God gave Solomon. He had everything. And this was in the height of Israel's glory and power. So Solomon had so much more to work with. So naturally, his temple, the first temple, would be one that you just couldn't match. It could not be matched. So now the older Jews that witnessed the splendor of the former temple, they were in so much anguish, they were weeping and wailing loudly. But they were missing the point. They were weeping over the physical appearance of the temple. The younger Jews were just simply experiencing God's freedom for the first time and were overjoyed to finally be free and to be able to grasp onto God and worship him the way he deserves to be worshiped. So where there was this combination of sheer elation and extreme sorrow. So how did God feel about this sorrow that was there? So I'm going to read from Zechariah chapter 4, verses 8 through 10. Zechariah, this is God speaking directly to the prophet Zechariah about these sorrowful people in Ezra at this time. This is kind of like God's take on this story happening right now. So starting in verse 8 in Zechariah 4, then the word of the Lord came to me. The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this temple. His hands will also complete it. Then you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. Who dares despise the day of small things? Since the 7 eyes of the Lord that range throughout the earth will rejoice when they see the chosen capstone in the hand of Zerubbabel. So here God's speaking to the prophet Zechariah, explaining his displeasure in their sorrow. He's saying, who dares despise the day of small things? God just miraculously set the Jews free, gave them back their land. Yet there's all this sadness. The 2 temples, Solomon's temple with all the splendor, and the current temple being built, which was going to be built with all their hearts, with everything they have, but they still are on 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. One's built by the richest and wisest king ever. The other is built by exiles returning to a nation in ruins. 2 totally situations. The older Jews couldn't let go of the lost splendor. The rest were happy just to have what they had. So a question that I want you to think about is, are there times where we can despise the day of small things? God just wants a place to dwell, regardless if it's Solomon's temple or this new temple. God just wants a place to dwell. And then in the new law, we're the temple. We are nothing close to the splendor of Solomon's temple, but yet God chooses to live in us. But to God, all these temples are equal because the hearts that built them, God had all their hearts. What God considers valuable and what man considers valuable are often 2 totally different things. But when we start to learn to understand God more and build those deeper relationships with God, our values start to align with God's values. And then there's mountains that can be moved when our hearts align with God's hearts. So the story, this story of the Jews being punished, being exiled or taken captive, and then being restored, it's not a new story. We all know this. During Jerusalem's long history, God has allowed it to be destroyed twice, besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, captured and recaptured 44 times. Each and every time they were clearly warned, if you don't repent, here's what's going to happen. But during each of those times, their hearts were hard. And then they had to go through those journeys. But then after their exile, their hearts changed just to being so grateful and desperate to cling on to God. Like you cling on to a life raft in a stormy sea. You're not going to let go of that. You're not going to complain what color the raft is, or it doesn't match my shirt or whatever. You're going to cling on to that thing with all your strength. But this story is like an endless loop. It repeats itself, over and over and over again in the Old Testament. And I remember reading it, back when I first studied the Bible and learned how to understand the Bible. I remember reading it and just literally shaking my head, like, what are these people doing? Why aren't they listening? Why aren't they learning? But then as I learned, I realized, well, that's not those people. God's trying to show us. That's me. That's us. We are stuck in a loop. We're a broken record, playing again and again and again. But I had to question, well, why did God want to emphasize this so much in the Old Testament? Why did God do this? Did God just want to bang us over the head with it, showing us, look, you're so stubborn and hopeless to your sinful desires, you're just stuck in this loop over and over again? Or does God want to show us his endless love, his endless patience, and that he'll do anything for us, no matter how tiring? We would have gave up long ago on anybody or any people or any group, but he wanted to show us an endless patience. Which one is it? Well, the answer is yes to both. You have to look at this, when you have to think about this, when you get too full of yourselves, when we think we're all that, we may have done something great, or spiritually we just feel we're all that, and before long you start looking down your nose at people. You better check yourselves. Start read about these endless loops and the stubbornness in the Old Testament, because that's who we are. But at the same time, when we're feeling other times in life where we're feeling so low about ourselves, we're feeling so lost, so depressed, thinking we're just one big mistake, I'm not worthy of God's love. Again, read these stories, because you'll see God's endless patience and endless love, endless adoration he has for us. So that's pretty much all I have. That brings us to the end of Ezra. So I just wanted to leave you with that and give you something to think about. So hopefully that spurs you on a little bit.